So, you want to be a real estate investor, but where do you start? How do you know what information and sources to trust? That's where I come in. I'm Jonny Cattani, and this is the Investor Relations Real Estate Podcast. Hey guys, real quick, before we start, go to investwithcattani.com and download my free ebook, Is Commercial Real Estate Recession Proof? Now to today's show. What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Investor Relations Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Jonny Cattani. Very excited for today's episode. Today's guest is Matt Picheny, a real estate investor, Tony Award winner, and author of the #1 best-selling book, Backstage Guide to Real Estate. He is focused on developing passive income streams that enable investors to write their own story and choose how they want to spend their time. Matt, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. We were talking offline here a little bit. I am obviously in Hawaii, hence the background not being my desk, which does not observe daylight savings time. So it's 7 a.m. my time. So very excited to have this as kind of the start of my Monday here. So like I was mentioning, I'm a huge fan of theater. So before we jump into real estate, kind of talk to me about, Broadway, how you got into acting and then eventually producing.
Sure. Well, it wasn't quite a linear path, but I moved to New York City in 1992 to pursue a career in theater. And then, so I went to a musical theater conservatory called AMDA. It's the American Musical and Dramatic Academy. And I graduated from there. 3 days after graduation, I was off on touring throughout the United States in a children's theater production. And I worked as a performer for 5 years, full time. I was in 15 different professional productions all across the United States. Then I got involved in real estate, which I know we'll get into in just a moment. Fast forward many years, I met a lovely woman who I married, and she's on the business side of theater. So she does a lot of the business end of the, in many various roles that she's had over the years. And she started first investing in theater and producing theatrical productions. And then I met her and I got involved as well. And at this point, the two of us team up together from time to time on occasion to put together Broadway shows. So, we've teamed together as co-producers on Moulin Rouge and American Utopia, which are two shows they're currently running on Broadway at the time we're recording this. American Utopia closes April 3rd of 2022, but we were fortunate enough that both of those shows actually won Tony Awards. So we are Tony Award winning co-producers of those two shows. And we've invested in other shows too. Some have done really well, like Hamilton is a big hit that we invested in. We've also invested in shows that have not done well. So, the investing in theater, unlike the real estate, which is my day-to-day, my 9 to 5, investing in real estate, in theater can be very rewarding, but it's extremely risky. And most shows on Broadway do not recoup their initial investment. I believe the statistic out there is 80%. 80% of shows do not recoup their initial investment. So it is not something for the faint-hearted. If you do invest in one of these shows like a Hamilton or Phantom of the Opera, one of these kind of one every 20 or 30 year type shows, you can be very lucky and do very well. But in most cases, there's a lot of risk involved. And so that's why that's not our full-time job. We do this once in a while with teams that we feel really good about and shows that we feel really good about.
That's awesome. It sounds like a lot, almost like venture capital as in kind of what I can relate it to in terms of you have to, invest in a few and then you kind of get that one that's obviously the home run. In your case, you had two that won Tony Awards. So that's really incredible. That's an awesome story. Like I said, I'm a big fan. So had to at least pick your brain a little bit on that. I know the main focus today is your real estate career. So, let's kind of jump into that. I know your first ever was a Washington Heights fix and flip, or fix up, I should say. So let's kind of jump backwards now. We'll get in. I know that real estate kind of intertwined with theater, so let's jump backwards there a little bit and kind of start there, and let's get into the full-time stuff here.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, I moved to New York City, graduated from the school, and then was off on tours for 5 years, doing performing all across the country. And I started tinkering around with computers and really liked that, and had a fun time learning that. And this was in the mid 90s. So the .com heydays, right? I mean, things were booming when it comes to the internet at that time. And so I actually started my own boutique agency here in New York, and ran that for about 5 years, until 2001, when the .com bubble burst. So when that happened, a lot of my clients were going out of business or not spending money on digital marketing. And my business was really falling apart. I mean, it was imploding. Things were not looking good from that perspective. And it was just so happened that at that time, my landlord told me that I had 90 days to get out of the apartment I was living in.
Wow.
So yeah, this was not a happy time for me.
Not what anyone ever wants to hear.
Yeah. So especially when your business is imploding. So I needed to find a place, to rent in New York where I didn't really need employment verification or something, because I didn't have, it was non-existent. What ended up happening was I got a job at Showtime, the cable television channel. They were a client of mine. They offered me a position in-house. And instead of renting, which is what my intention was, to rent something on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It's a part of town that I really love. Thought it would be great to live there. Again, I had lived there when I first moved to the city and went to that musical theater conservatory. So my sister was living up in Washington Heights, and she saw an ad on a bulletin board for an apartment that was for sale up in Washington Heights. It was a co-op apartment. I ended up buying that co-op apartment instead of renting. And a little over 2 years later, I sold the apartment and saw my initial investment in the deal more than quadruple in value.
Wow.
And that was like a really big moment for me to see what happened with that real estate investment. And, look, I pat myself on the back a bit on that deal. I found a really great neighborhood. We did a lot of work on the unit itself, and I also joined the co-op board in renovating the property, the lobby and the hallways, which were all dated when I bought the place. So the place looked a lot better, but also the real estate market was booming in that time, especially in New York. So that was fantastic. And for me, that profit from that one deal was more than I was making in my yearly salary at the time. And I was making a pretty good salary. So I said, how do I do that again? Because this is really powerful,
Absolutely.
So I used the proceeds from the sale to buy an apartment on the Upper West Side. So I was in that Upper West Side that I wanted to live in, and I owned, which was really cool. And about a year later, I bought my first truly investment property. And that was a piece of land up in Northwest Connecticut that I bought, owned for a few years, and then developed the lot. It was a 1 acre lot. We built a house on there. And so that was quite an undertaking and quite an education in learning about real estate and how real estate is what it's really made of, like literally from the ground up. Because we had a lot and cleared it out and dug a hole and poured a foundation. So I learned all the construction components to it, but I also learned things because I rented it out. And so I learned about renting apartments and leases and dealing with tenants, and also the really fun stuff like accounting, like things like depreciation.
Was there any like rezoning or anything like that while you held on to it, or you just kind of already knew what you wanted to do, just waited a little bit before you started building?
Yeah. When I bought the lot, it had plans on it for a single family house. That wasn't permitted, but there were plans that had been somewhat approved through there's a homeowners association in the development where this was. It's a beautiful area where there's a lake and everything. I mean, my lot wasn't lakefront, unfortunately, but there was a property owners association. So those plans had already been approved. Now we didn't go forward with those plans, but at least I knew, I can build something there. And it was zoned for, a single family residential property. So that was fine. When we designed the house, we did need to put it in front of the property owners association, the town, just to get everything approved. And we needed to get permits and all that, but there was no rezoning or anything of that nature that needed to be done.
Nice. Okay. Awesome. So you've done your first deal, you built your first house. Kind of walk us through a little bit of that deal. And then, it sounds like it probably just took off from there, the art of the first deal, as they say. So walk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it for this property was a little bit different than maybe the first deal that, at least that I think of when I think of people who are doing this on a full-time sort of basis, because this was just a single family home, and this was a home that I was going to essentially be living in part-time. I mean, I thought this was going to be a vacation home. It turned out, because of circumstances, to be something that I rented out the entire time. It was a full-time rental. We rented it on a short-term basis, but it was rentable year-round. After that property, I still held on to it, but I moved from the Upper West Side to Brooklyn. So I got married. We were having our first kid, and we needed a little more space. 600 square feet on the Upper West Side of Manhattan just wasn't going to cut it for us. So we moved to Brooklyn, and I did. So I've written a book, and the chapter in my book that talks about this is called An Accidental House Hack, because a lot of times people call this thing nowadays house hack. I didn't know, I had never even heard the term back then. I didn't know this was a thing. But what I did know, as I was looking at the numbers on this deal, was that, hey, I could buy this building, this little townhouse, a 2-family, and live in one of the units, and the other unit was rented, and just keep it rented. And our portion of the mortgage payments would be less than half. So our tenants were actually paying more than what we were paying in terms of, rent on the property, if you will, because we paid this mortgage. And that was a wonderful investment for us. We were very excited about it. And I knew that if we ever moved, that I could rent out our unit for more than what the upstairs tenants were paying, because, well, first off, we renovated the unit when we moved in. So our unit looked nicer because it had really nice finishes on it. But number two, we had access to a backyard that they didn't have upstairs. So I was like, okay, this is great. If we ever need to move out, we'll be able to have some nice positive cash flow. And that's what happened. We ended up leaving about a year, little over a year, close to a year and a half. I think it was right around a year and a half after moving into the apartment, because my wife got approached completely out of the blue with a really cool job opportunity in Miami, Florida. So we moved to Miami, and we rented out the townhouse. I'll actually say this townhouse, because we live in it now. Spoiler alert: we ended up moving back, and I'm here now. And
full circle.
This is my office and where we live. Yeah, but we moved to Miami. We were in Miami for a couple of years, and then my wife got approached again out of the blue. Both times was out of the blue, for a really fantastic job opportunity in Boston. We lived in Boston for 4 years, and we've been back in New York City now for about 8 months. The job in Boston promoted her and wanted her to come into New York. The North American headquarters are in Manhattan, so we moved back to New York. But while I was in Miami, that's when I decided to go into real estate full time, and started learning about real estate syndication, started investing passively in syndications, was looking for the first deal to syndicate. And the first deal that I actually got, though, we had already moved up to Boston. So it was while I was living in Boston. And that's when I did that sort of elusive first deal. It took me 2 years to get that first deal. And that first deal was 132 units. almost $10 million property. And, so we needed to have $2.6 million, a little more than 2.6 million of capital to, as the down payment, as the equity in this deal. And I didn't have that. And I had always, after the townhouse in Brooklyn, while we were still in Brooklyn, that the first time, I wanted to buy another townhouse, just like the one I had bought. I knew it was a great deal. I mean, I was like, the tenants are paying more than half the rent. I know that our unit could rent for even more than that. Like, this is a cash flowing property. How do I find more of these? The big problem for me at the time was, first finding that deal would have been very difficult, but I didn't even get to that point because I was like, how am I ever going to pay for that? Your townhouse in Brooklyn, New York is 7 figures. And so I would need, at least 200,000, if not, probably more of dollars to invest. And I just didn't have it. I was tapped out buying the first one, right? I didn't have any money. And so my plan back then was, oh, you know what? I'll continue to work my job. I was working in corporate America. So after Showtime, I started working at all these different advertising agencies, sort of climbing the corporate ladder. I was a vice president at an advertising agency at that point. And I was like, I'll just keep doing this. I was making a decent salary. I'll save up for another 5 years or so, 10 years, whatever, hopefully get enough money and then buy another townhouse is kind of where my mentality was, just doing it as sort of a hobby thing. And when I moved down to Miami is when I found out about syndications. And so for your listeners who don't know what that is, that's where a bunch of investors can pool together all their capital, all their resources, experience, all kinds of things like that, and get these deals that otherwise I would never have been able to do.
And what led you to syndications? Did you hear about it from someone else who was successful or just doing research?
Yeah, I heard about it on a podcast. And so at that time, there wasn't many there. I don't think there was this. I'll tell you, I don't think there was a single podcast about real estate syndications back then. Nowadays, you can go on iTunes and you'll just get bombarded with them. Yeah. And some of them are good and some of them really aren't, but there's just a ton of them. Right. And they're great. I have nothing against them. We're on one right now. Right. But at the time there was nobody talking about syndications that I could find. And I kept listening. And then at one point I randomly heard someone say something about syndication. I'm like, oh, what's that? And then they didn't talk about it the rest of the episode, but they had a podcast. So I went on to their podcast, and then I ended up from that podcast onto another podcast. And that podcast were people who do syndications, and they have a seminar on how to be successful in syndications. So I went to that seminar live in Dallas, Texas. I flew to Dallas to go to this seminar, and wow, I was like, this is where I need to be.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that's an incredible story. Like you said, kind of one of the pioneers of the syndication. Used to be just a very small circle from what I understand way back when. So I know you're a huge proponent of it now. You've obviously written the book, which really highlights it. You're also a huge proponent of, as cliche as it is, be the change you wish to see in the world, which I'm also a big fan of, and even using real estate investing as a form of activism. So kind of talk about now what your guys' thesis is and, the different projects that you're working on.
Sure. We have a lot of different projects that we're working on. But to just get to that sort of investment as activism, I actually wrote an article about that. That's in Fast Company. I think that landlords nowadays are they're just getting the raw end of the deal. I mean, the media is portraying us as these evil landlords. And while there are evil landlords out there, I don't deny it. And there are slumlords that are out there. That's not me. That's not who I'm about. And I think there's quite a few of us who are more interested in providing good, clean, affordable housing for people. And so I'm really interested in reinventing property ownership as a positive for communities. And, I believe that all deals should be a win-win. So that means it's a win for the residents who live in the property. It's a win for the staff. We treat the staff who work at the property extremely well. And then it's also a win for our investors. This is a business. This is not a charity. I'm not curing cancer. We are in this to make a profit. But I think that the bottom line doesn't have to just be about dollars and cents. I think that you can do well by doing good. And I think you can be an ethical business person and still be profitable, right? And so that's something that I'm very interested in. And so we do that in many different ways across the communities. We always try to make sure that our tenants have a roof over their head. We don't want any of our residents to be displaced. We sometimes do have to have people leave the property, but we do everything in our power to make sure that doesn't happen. And that started way before COVID. And it was something that we kept up during COVID, trying to work with our residents to make sure they could stay in the units, trying to help them find other sources of housing, relief, right? There are all these different programs, especially during COVID, that were there to help tenants be able to stay in their homes, right? So we really wanted to work with people to make sure that they could stay, work out payment plans, anything that we have to do. And we've been able to do that very successfully, which has been great. And it's also good for the investors too. I mean, if you want to look at it, first off, we're just being humans here, making sure people have a place to stay. But number two, the highest cost involved, you've got payroll and taxes, but beyond that, really the highest cost in operating these properties is your turnover cost when somebody leaves.
Right.
So if we can keep people in their units and somehow figure out ways to get them rent relief, that's much better than having somebody move out. Keep our occupancy high. And keep our tenants happy, and so that's really important to us. We make sure that we do keep the tenants happy by making sure that we have good services at the property, that things are being cared for appropriately. We're just taking care of all the basic operational things. We don't have any work. We don't want any work orders. So someone calls the office, or a lot of times we can do it digitally now, put in a trouble ticket. They have an issue with their unit. We don't want to see any of those taking longer than 72 hours. If it's longer than 72 hours to fix, that's a problem. Okay. Right. And sometimes it does take longer than 72 hours, depending on what the issue is, if we have to order a part. Obviously, none of these are critical. If there was water coming in from the ceiling, that'll get addressed immediately. But just, like maybe a leaky faucet or a toilet that's running or something like that. We want all that stuff taken care of quickly, so tenants are happy with the place that they live in. We also have done, in certain cases, we're able to do different types of things for water conservation and electric conservation. Absolutely. We've done this across, I would say, almost all, or at least I'd say 99% of our properties, where we're able to implement these things. And sometimes it's good for us. I mean, we have, bathrooms in the leasing office, and so we pay that water bill. But a lot of times the utility bills are paid for by the residents.
Right.
So we go in and we do a water conservation program. We replace toilets and shower heads and all those kinds of things. We see a reduction in the water bills across the entire property of about 33%, about a third. Wow. So our tenants are really happy because they get new stuff, first off, right? And number two, their water bill goes down. I mean, they're thrilled, right? So that's really good for them. And then a lot of times we can get a special addendum on our mortgage.
And a lot of times, sorry,
go ahead.
No, continue. Addendum on the mortgage.
I was just going to say, a lot of times we can get a modified mortgage. There's certain programs, like Fannie Mae has a green program that will allow us to get a little bit of a lower interest rate on our.
That's awesome.
On our loan. So like we've helped the tenants, right, the residents, because we've lowered their bills. We've helped the environment because we're using less water, and we're helping the investors because our loan is got a lower interest rate. So that's really a win all the way around. And we look for opportunities like that across all our properties.
Right. Absolutely. And like you said, when you're able to give those living conditions, and a lot of times what I've noticed talking to operators is you'll get into these places, usually going to be a value add, especially sounds like that's a big part of your guys's, philosophy and strategy is the value add play. But a lot of times involved in that is below market rents. But when you bring these units up to market standard, a lot of times you're not actually having to force tenants out. They're actually willing to stay and pay the additional rate, even though it's a higher rate, just because you made their living quality even better, and you brought it up to market, which means that pretty much everywhere they go, if they want that same quality of living, they're going to have to pay that price. So it makes it easier. And, you guys are giving them a better quality and even possibly reducing certain aspects of their living by, doing some of these green strategies. So along that, what kind of markets are you guys focused on? Are you finding yourself having to go into more secondary and tertiary markets now because of, all of these, obviously the way the market's headed in these primary markets, or, kind of talk about some of the markets and what you look for?
Sure. Well, just to put a bow on the last thing that you had mentioned, we had a problem with the first property that we went ahead and did all of this work on, because we found the tenants didn't want to move. we had underwritten for a certain amount of people, that's just normal, right? That people eventually, move. And so that's what we thought would happen. And we did such great improvement that this property, the sidewalk itself was like reduced to rubble before we moved in. So the first thing we did was we poured all new sidewalks, and we did really nice handrails for everyone. And we did the water conservation program, and nobody wanted to leave. We were raising their rents up a little bit. The rents were around $200 under market. So we were raising the rents about $100 a month, which is like a pretty healthy increase. But anywhere else in the market, they would have to pay $200. So to only have to pay $100 more a month was still a great deal for them. They loved it. And our first year cash on cash returns, we still had good cash on cash returns, but they weren't as high as projected because we didn't have as much turnover as we had anticipated. By the time we came around in year 2, things got to where they were supposed to be, where we had projected. But the first year was just a little slow to start because no one wanted to move. So just to your point. But you had asked me about markets, what sort of markets we're looking at. We're looking for markets where we're seeing some nice stability in terms of employment and population. We like to see that trending upwards. In certain cases, we've bought properties in, we have 2 properties that we've acquired that are in smaller towns. When I talk about a population of around 100,000, I don't buy in anything less than 100,000, but there's 2 properties that that are great areas that have great economic drivers, diverse economy, and we see an upward trend, not a massive spike like you might see in Dallas, which is also one of the markets that we invest in, but where we see a nice and slow and steady growth, and we've been able to find properties in those locations that are well under market, and so we've been able to go in, renovate the properties, renovate the units, tighten up the operations, and do very well and have nice cash flowing properties. One of those we've actually exited from already. So that is something that we look at. And then we also participate in larger markets. We have a lot, the majority of the portfolio that I have under management is in Dallas, Houston. We have some assets in Kansas City, but a lot of them we're selling the last one right now. Actually, we're closing in a few weeks, but so I'm really focused more on in the Texas markets lately, and focus squarely in the Dallas Fort Worth area. We just see a lot of growth, and we think it's a great market. And I think there's still it's a heated market. There's a lot of people competing, but we have some great broker relationships and relationships with property management that's allowing us get out in front of deals. And that's Not always, but once in a while works out to be very favorable for us.
Awesome. I know you're a huge proponent as well as the freedom that this can do for obviously busy professionals. That's, what we're all looking for to help investors. So kind of talk about, you wrote the book, obviously. Talk about, where your investors have come from in your inner circle and kind of, what the book has opened up in terms of, being able to show people that freedom that passive investing can really give them.
Yeah, the freedom of passive investing is something that has always been of interest of mine, and something that I've been building. So alongside, I have 2,300 units, a little over that I'm a general partner on. I'm actively managing those properties. I have a passive portfolio, where I've invested in over 6,000 apartment units just passively as a limited partner. And that was something that I started 6 years ago and have just been building, and certain of those have gone full cycle and sold. And then I've just reinvested that capital into more and more deals. It's been wonderful. And that's really what the book talks about. So I do talk about my first deal as a syndicator in the book, but the book is really about my journey in real estate as a whole. So starting with that first apartment, when I got kicked out of that apartment, I needed to buy something, all the way to where I am now. And what I do is I share with readers, I take them along that journey, and I share with them the keystone concepts that I learned along my journey, right? And so there's 18 different keystone concepts in the book. And the book is really a narrative. It's really like a memoir. And so it's not like a really boring real estate textbook. It's educational. There's 60 different real estate terms that are defined in the book, but it reads more like a story, more like a memoir. So it's palatable. It's something that people can read and not fall asleep, hopefully. I try to put some good humor in there and tell some interesting stories, with the acting and the digital marketing and just my foray into all these different real estate things. I think it makes it an interesting and fun read, but still educational. And, the thing about passive investing is it's always billed as, make money while you sleep. And while that is true, there is a certain amount of work that needs to be done up front. This is not the kind of thing that I think you could be very successful in just flying blind. And so I was flying blind a little bit, but I was getting education. And so what I tried to do in the book is give people some education on, hey, here are the things you need to know. Here are the things you need to look out for when you're looking at a passive real estate investment deal. So the last, the main 208 pages of the book is that narrative, right? That has all of that information in there, those keystone concepts and the real estate definitions. But the last 50 pages of the book is a little area that I call the Backstage toolbox. It has a glossary in it. It has all the keystone concepts summarized, but what's more important is it has a section that's called Quickly Sizing Up a Syndication, where I give 5 different things that you want to ask about the 3 different pillars. So one of the keystone concepts is that there's 3 pillars to every deal: the sponsor, the market, and the deal itself. So I give 5 questions you're going to want to ask on those 3 pillars, and possible answers, and whether those answers are good, bad, or indifferent. And I have a key, thumbs up means that's a good answer. This is probably a good deal to invest in. Then I have like fingers crossed, which is like, oh, I don't know. It's kind of a wonky answer. And then a thumbs down, which is like, hey, that's a red flag. Maybe you don't want to invest in this deal. You need to investigate further, right? So I have that part. And then I have a thing that I call the Backstage tour of syndications, which gets in a really in-depth kind of nitty-gritty numbers, like talking about exit cap rates and rent growth and household income and all the really kind of nitty-gritty statistics that you need to look at if you want to vet these deals. I think that someone could read this book in a weekend. It's not like that crazy of a book, and then keep it as a reference. And, if people read a book or 2 like this, listen to a few podcasts, I think you could be ready to start passively investing in deals. Then you need to vet sponsors, make sure the sponsor's good. But once you've done that, so like that's where I am now, right? I've got the education. I know how to vet sponsors. I've actually got a list of sponsors, people that I would do deals with because I like them. I've gotten to know them a bit. And I get their deal flow. I get emails from them. And so if an email comes in and I have some capital to deploy at that time, then I'll look at the deal. And then I need to look at the deal, but that takes me a half an hour, maybe an hour tops to look at the deal. Usually I can do it in 30 minutes at most. And then just invest in the deal. So it can be very, very passive, very easy to do if you have a lot of demands from both your work life and your regular, your social life. You can do it, but it does take a little bit of upfront work.
Yeah, and that's a huge point there as well. Obviously that's what we all want to do, right? We want to help those busy professionals, like you said, make money in their sleep. And that sounds great, but it is important to highlight that you can't just walk down the street. And especially now with so many people getting into commercial real estate, you can't just walk down the street and just pick a sponsor just because they're going into the Houston market, which is a great market, or the Phoenix market. But just because they're going in there, it doesn't mean that you need to give them $50,000, $100,000. Be like, yeah, yep, you're the sponsor. It does take a little bit of time, understand who they are, talk to people who have invested with them. I know that's a key point that you talk about as well, is, if someone can vouch for them, then yeah, maybe, your vetting process doesn't need to be as intense, but do make sure that you're vetting those sponsors in the beginning. And then, once you have those 2 or 3 that you're very comfortable with, then you can just get in those deal flow. And then when the capital is available, but make sure you're, vetting them and taking that time, because unfortunately there are new people or people who are a little too aggressive in their underwriting, perhaps, whatever it may be. And, you don't want to fall victim to those. I know you've probably learned some things the hard way. Is that kind of part of it, not vetting sponsors well enough, or kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I've learned a bunch of things the hard way, which I try to convey in the book so that other people don't have to learn it the hard way. Yeah, I mean, look, vetting sponsors, vetting markets, vetting deals, like all 3. I've learned, over the years by passively investing in others' deals, and then also doing deals myself. I mean, you really, when you start doing your own deals, you really get to see exactly how that sausage is made, right? And it can be a great thing, but you have to make sure that the sponsors know what they're doing. It's interesting. There's a group that I invested in their deal, and it did really well, and it sold. And beyond it doing well, I just liked them. I mean, they were good guys. The communication was good. And they had another deal, and they said, hey, we have this this other deal that we're doing. Would you like to invest in that? And I went through it, and I hadn't written the book yet, but I still had sort of this mental kind of criteria of things that I would look for as I'm going through the deal. And it had all these red flags. Like if you went through that book through that deal with my book, you probably would have marked a bunch of red flags, because there were things that are, in most cases, I think would be problematic. I got on the phone with them and we talked through the deal, and I really grilled them on these things, and they had great answers for every single one of these deals. And I had done a deal with them before, and the deal had done very well. So I had a lot of trust and faith with them, and we still have that deal, and it's been doing incredibly well, and it's going to go on the market for sale soon, and it'll be another home run for them. So, I mean, that just, I think, speaks a little bit to track record, and a little bit to, you gotta understand really the mechanics of the deal. Because the way this thing was underwritten for normal people, for most syndicators, I think it would not have done well. But there was a bunch of extenuating circumstances in this particular case. So it's really like a case by case basis. And like I'm saying, you really got to, it's like an onion, right? You just got to peel back those layers to really see what's going on with a deal. And once you get experienced, it doesn't take that long to do. I mean, it took me a half an hour to review it, then a half an hour on the phone to go through all the issues that I had with the deal.
Right.
But I mean, you really, there's a lot of complexity there to these things and a lot of moving parts. And so absolutely. You really need to understand that.
And you trusted them, you know, and they had the answers. So certainly, you know, if they weren't aware of those things, then that's obviously a huge red flag. You're probably going to pull the plug on the deal.
Well, I can't tell you how many times there's been deals that I was looking at doing passively, and I've had some red flags, and I've gotten on the phone with the sponsors, and the answers were not good, and I didn't invest.
Right.
That's happened like countless times. This is like, I think, the only time where I've had a lot of red flags, and it was like, oh, okay, those are good answers.
Awesome. I love that. And that just speaks to them, you know, as operators and their experience. And that's what you look for. So that's really huge for passive investors. So we're kind of coming up on time here. I wish we could keep talking forever, but we'll jump into the final 5 questions. Just a quick, easy 5 questions that I ask everyone. So first question is, best advice you've gotten from a mentor?
To just keep being persistent.
Awesome. I love that. What is it about your career that makes you feel like you're fulfilling your why? Whatever the reason is you do it, what part of this makes you fulfill that, do you think?
Well, I'm really about making the world a better place, like leaving it a little bit better than I found it. Like I said, not curing cancer, but trying to do good. And that's part, you know, reinventing property ownership as a positive for communities is really perfect for that, right? So that's it.
I love that so much. That's huge. I'm a huge proponent of, you know, like we said earlier, kind of being that change you wish to see in the world. And, you know, that's all we can do, right? Is start there. So I love that so much. All right. What is your favorite non-real estate or investment related book?
Oh, non-real estate book. Oh my goodness. You're throwing me for a loop here. I'm looking over at my bookshelf and all I see is real estate books. I was going to say The Power Broker. That's a novel, but it's about real estate actually. How about Live from New York? I've got a great book that chronicles Saturday Night Live from the early days.
Oh, wow.
I'm a big fan. I mean, current cast, there's goods and bads in there, right? But the old ones are the best.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so if your personal investor avatar was a Marvel superhero, which one would you be?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, your personal investor. So you as an investor.
Me as an investor
was a Marvel superhero. Which one was it? Which one would it be?
I don't really know the superheroes all that, the Marvel guys all that well. Wolverine,
that's
I don't know. Like, I don't, Thor, I don't, Iron Man, I don't know. I like Tony Stark, maybe Iron Man.
Iron Man's a great one. Totally. Absolutely. Has all the tools.
Maybe Iron Man. Sure. Yeah. I'd go with that. I was Tony Stark for Halloween one year.
Nice. Awesome. I love that. Cool. Last question, super easy. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you and reach out if they have more questions?
Oh, so go to picheny.com. That's my website. It's P like in Peter, ICHENY.com. And I'm sure you'll link to that in the show notes.
Absolutely.
But go there. You can get my book. You can get, I have a blog where I write really great real estate educational stuff completely free. And I also have a free newsletter where we have I put in investing tips and tricks and things like that. So go to picheny.com for all of that.
Awesome. Can confirm the blog is great. I was reading some of the blog posts last night. You're a very great writer as well. So I'm usually not a huge blog reader because they all kind of sound the same, but you can tell that there's some theater in there, which I love, little humor and some nuances. So huge fan of the blog, you guys. We'll link everything, like you said, in the show notes, link to the book as well. You can buy his book on Amazon, Backstage Guide to Real Estate. Matt, it's been so much fun talking to you. I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, John, thanks for having me on. Really had fun talking with you today, although I wish I was in Hawaii with you right now.
Yeah, and I apologize earlier if you heard a rooster. They're everywhere on this island, so hopefully it wasn't too loud. Really cool. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. Listen, I know it's cliche and you hear it all the time, but please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you know when the next video is coming out. Even though this is technically a daily podcast, you know it's coming out the next day. We have a ton of content coming your way. So please like and subscribe. It helps a ton. Leave comments. Would love to know what you guys think. And we will see you on the next one. Thanks so much.